Orphanage mechanic boy refused the club's money, so the bikers paid him back. In a way no one expected. The boy's hands were inside the engine bay when the bikes rolled in. He didn't look up at first. He was bent forward, thin shoulders tight under a grease-stained hoodie, fingers moving with slow precision around a stripped alternator bolt. Rain had passed an hour ago, leaving the orphanage yard smelling like wet rust and old oil. Somewhere behind him, a generator coughed and died. The first engine shut off, then another, then a third. That was when the boy froze. He didn't turn. He just stopped breathing for a second, like prey counting footsteps. The sound of heavy boots on gravel came next. Leather creaked, metal cooled, the kind of silence that only follows something loud and intentional. "Kid." The voice was low, calm, not unkind, worse than shouting. The boy wiped his hands on his jeans and straightened slowly. He was maybe 16, maybe younger. Dark hair cut by someone who didn't care about symmetry. Knuckles scarred, nails permanently blackened. He looked past the speaker, counting the bikes without moving his lips. 6 of them. Not a club parade. Not a show. A working crew. "Yes, sir," the boy said. The man who'd spoken stepped forward. Big frame, gray threaded through his beard, jacket patched and worn soft from miles. His eyes didn't scan the yard. They stayed on the boy's hands. "You fix bikes?" the man asked. "I fix what breaks," the boy said. "If it's got parts, I'll try." That earned him a half smile from someone behind the speaker. A quiet sound, gone quick. The man nodded toward the open hood. "What's wrong with it?" "Voltage regulator's shot," the boy said. "Or the stator. Hard to tell without pulling it. It's old. Everything in this place is." The man glanced around then. The orphanage wasn't much. 2 low buildings, peeling paint, a fence that leaned like it had given up arguing with the wind. A hand-painted sign near the gate read, "St. Agnes Home for Boys." The letters faded unevenly, like some of them had been loved more than others. "You charge?" the man asked. The boy shook his head. "I don't charge here." "Why not?" The boy hesitated, just long enough to show it wasn't a rehearsed answer. "They already paid for me once," he said. Silence settled again, thicker this time. The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded roll of cash. Didn't flash it, didn't count it, just held it between 2 fingers like it weighed nothing. "For your time," he said. The boy didn't take it. "I can't," he said. The man raised an eyebrow. "You can." The boy shook his head harder. "I won't." Behind the man, one of the bikers shifted his stance, not aggressive, just surprised. "You sure?" the man asked. "That's good money." "I know what it is," the boy said. "And I'm sure." The man studied him now, really looked. The hollow at the base of his throat, the way his jacket sleeves were too short, the faint tremor in his hands that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with hunger. "You know who we are?" the man asked. The boy nodded. "Everyone knows." "And you're still saying no?" "Yes, sir." The man glanced back at his crew. They didn't speak. They never did unless they had to. One of them, a lean man with wire-rimmed glasses and oil under his nails, met the leader's eyes and gave the smallest nod. The leader turned back to the boy. "Why?" he asked. The boy swallowed. "Because money changes things," he said, "and I don't want this place to change." The man looked at the orphanage again, the sagging fence, the dead generator, the boys inside watching from cracked windows, pretending not to. "You think it hasn't already?" he asked. The boy didn't answer. Instead, he stepped back toward the engine bay and picked up his wrench again. "I'll finish the fix," he said, "for free, or you can take it somewhere else." The leader stared at him for a long moment. Then he folded the cash and slid it back into his jacket. "All right," he said. "Finish it." The boy exhaled just a little and leaned back over the engine. What he didn't see was the look that passed through the crew. Not disappointment, recognition. They stayed while he worked. They didn't rush him, didn't hover. One of them sat on a low wall and lit a cigarette, shielding the flame from the wind. Another checked tire pressure out of habit. The leader stood with his hands in his pockets and listened to the place breathe. When the engine finally turned over clean, the boy stepped back, grease on his cheek, eyes bright with relief. "That should hold," he said, "long as you don't ride it like you hate it." A few of the bikers laughed quietly. The leader swung a leg over the bike and hit the starter. The engine answered smooth and steady. He looked at the boy one last time. "What's your name?" he asked. Eli, the boy said. The leader nodded. All right, Eli. They rode out a minute later, engines rolling low and controlled as they passed through the gate. The boys at the windows waved when they thought no one was looking. Eli watched until the last taillight disappeared. He didn't see the leader slow at the end of the road, didn't see him lift a hand, didn't see the entire crew turn around. Before we go on, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching this from. Eli didn't sleep much that night. He went back into the orphanage garage after the last taillight faded and the yard returned to its usual sounds, rainwater dripping off gutters, the distant hiss of traffic, the generator's silence like a held breath. He shut the bay door with both hands and leaned into it for a second, forehead against cold metal, letting the tension drain out of his shoulders one slow notch at a time. Then he turned around and did what he always did when something big happened. He worked. Not because there was more to fix, because work kept his head from filling with noise he couldn't control, because a wrench was honest, because bolts didn't lie. He wiped down the tools, put them back in their drawer in the same order, checked the oil can, stared at the pile of dead parts he'd saved from the trash, alternators, belts, spark plugs with life still left in them, and sorted them by feel and memory. He didn't have the kind of childhood that came with hobbies. His hobby was making sure things didn't fall apart when nobody was looking. Outside, the orphanage was a low, tired building full of boys who learned to disappear into corners. St. Agnes called them residents, the city called them wards, Eli called them little shadows that needed heat in the winter and shoes that didn't split at the seams. The staff called him the mechanic boy, like it was a job title and not a warning. The younger kids called him when their bikes broke, when a fan stopped turning, when a window wouldn't close. The older kids called him when they needed to borrow a wrench to open a padlock they didn't own. He didn't ask why. He just fixed what broke. The director, Mrs. Hanley, liked Eli because he was quiet and useful. Quiet and useful meant less paperwork. Less paperwork meant fewer questions from the county. She never said it out loud, but Eli had learned to read the way adults weighed children like inventory. He was 16, technically. His file said 17. He'd stopped correcting it after a social worker told him, age is flexible when it needs to be. He'd heard that sentence enough to understand what it meant. Truth wasn't the point. Convenience was. The next morning, he woke before the alarm bell that never worked right. He washed his face in cold water that stung his skin awake and pulled on the same hoodie, still smelling like oil. He ate 2 pieces of toast standing up. Then he walked back to the garage and got the generator running again, because the kitchen needed power and nobody else knew how to talk to a carburetor. When the courtyard began to fill with voices and footsteps, Eli stayed in the bay. Not hiding. Staying out of sight the way you stayed out of storms when you didn't have a roof you owned. By noon, the bikes came back. Not all of them. 4 this time. Different arrangement, same energy. Eli heard them before he saw them, engines rolling low, controlled, like the riders didn't need to announce anything. He set the wrench down and stepped out into the yard, wiping his hands on his jeans. The younger boys at the windows moved back fast. Someone inside whispered the word club, like it was a curse and a prayer at the same time. The leader dismounted first. Same man, same beard, same calm. His eyes didn't go to the building this time. They went straight to Eli. Eli held his ground, because that's what you did when someone returned without needing a reason. You did good work, the leader said. Eli nodded. It's holding. The man patted the gas tank. Like it's supposed to. Eli waited for the money again. It didn't come. Instead, the leader reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, thin, creased, not official looking. He held it out. Eli didn't take it immediately. What's that? Eli asked. A receipt, the leader said. Eli frowned. For what? I didn't take anything. The leader's mouth twitched. Exactly. He held the paper steady until Eli finally took it. The page was blank except for a date, a time, and 3 handwritten words. Paid in full. Eli stared at it like it was a joke he didn't understand. He looked up. Paid for what? The leader didn't answer right away. He nodded toward the bay. Show me your tools. Eli hesitated. Then he turned and walked back into the garage. The club followed in, boots heavy on concrete, bodies filling the space in a way that made the air feel smaller. Eli stopped at his workbench, old, scarred, made from scrap wood and stubbornness, and opened the drawers. Not much, a few wrenches mismatched, one ratchet with a cracked handle, a torque wrench he'd fixed twice, a multimeter with tape holding the battery cover on. Everything he owned was functional, but tired. One of the bikers, lean wire-rim glasses, hands that looked like they belonged to someone who also fixed things, picked up the multimeter and turned it over gently. "Where'd you get this?" he asked. Eli shrugged. "Trash pile behind the county shop." The biker nodded like he'd expected that. The leader stepped closer, gaze moving across the bench, the parts bins, the shelves Eli had built out of pallet wood. He pointed at a rusted tool chest in the corner. "That yours?" he asked. Eli's jaw tightened. It was. The lock broke. Somebody emptied it last month. The leader's eyes didn't change, but the air did, like something had been logged. "Who?" the leader asked. Eli shook his head. "Doesn't matter." "It matters to me," the leader replied, calm as ever. Eli swallowed. He didn't want this to turn into a thing. Things grew teeth. Things brought consequences down on places like this. The orphanage survived by staying uninteresting. "Doesn't matter," Eli repeated. The leader held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. "All right," he said. "Then we'll keep it boring." He turned and walked out of the bay without another word. The crew followed, but not before the man with glasses set the multimeter back down exactly where he'd found it, like he respected the order in Eli's world. Eli followed them into the yard. "What are you doing here?" Eli asked, not accusatory, just blunt. "You already got your bike fixed." The leader looked at the orphanage building again. This time his eyes lingered on the fence, on the gate latch, on the sagging sign, like he was reading the place the way Eli read engines. "You didn't take money," the leader said. Eli didn't answer. "Most people do," the leader continued, "even the ones who act like they won't. They take it later, quiet, through somebody else. Pride always gets hungry." Eli felt heat rise in his throat. "I'm not proud." The leader nodded like he believed him. "Good. Then you're smart." Eli stared. "Smart doesn't pay bills." The leader's eyes sharpened slightly. "You got bills?" Eli almost laughed. "This place does. They just don't call them bills. They call them shortages." The leader glanced at one of his men. A small nod passed between them, silent and practiced. Eli caught it and felt something tighten again. "Don't," Eli said. The leader looked back at him. "Don't what?" "Don't make this into charity," Eli said. "We don't do that here." The leader's voice stayed even. "You refusing money wasn't about charity." Eli opened his mouth, then closed it. Because the leader was right. Eli didn't refuse the cash because he hated help. He refused because money always came with strings, even when people swore it didn't. Money turned into favors, into expectations, into someone showing up later and saying, "Remember that time? Remember what I did?" Eli had grown up owing. He was done owing. The leader stepped closer, keeping his hands visible, not crowding. "What happens when you turn 18? He asked. Eli's jaw worked. "They'll transition me." "To where?" the leader asked. Eli looked away. "They say they'll help with a program, training, something." The leader nodded slowly. "And you believe them?" Eli didn't answer. The silence was answer enough. One of the bikers cleared his throat, uneasy. "Kid," he said, "you got talent." Eli snapped his eyes back. "Don't." The biker raised both hands slightly. "Just saying." Eli swallowed. He didn't like compliments. Compliments were the first step toward someone feeling entitled to you. The leader watched Eli carefully. "What if I told you we don't pay with money?" he said. Eli frowned. "Then how do you pay?" The leader looked out toward the road beyond the fence, where traffic moved indifferent and steady. "We close accounts," he said. Eli didn't like the sound of that. It felt like violence wearing a clean shirt. "I don't want accounts closed," Eli said. "I want to be left alone." The leader's gaze stayed on him. "You already aren't." Eli felt that land in his ribs. Because it was true. The orphanage wasn't left alone. The garage wasn't left alone. People came in and took what they wanted because nobody stopped them. The county came with inspections and threats. The neighborhood kids came with stolen tools. The system came with promises that expired. Left alone wasn't peace. It was neglect. Still, Eli shook his head. "I didn't ask for you." The leader nodded. "No, you didn't." He took a step back, signaling his crew without words. The bikes started one by one, engines vibrating through the yard. The younger boys at the windows leaned forward again, unable to help themselves. Fascination always won over fear when you were 12. The leader swung a leg over his bike and looked at Eli one last time. "You said money changes things," he said. Eli held his gaze. "It does," the leader nodded. "Then watch what happens when you don't take it." He kicked the stand up. The bikes rolled out slow, tires crunching gravel, not in a hurry. The last rider looked back at Eli briefly, glasses catching light, and then they were gone again, leaving only the smell of exhaust and the echo of control. Eli stood in the yard for a long time after. He didn't tell anyone they'd come back. He didn't tape the paid-in-full paper to the wall like a trophy. He folded it and slid it into the drawer with his multimeter, because that was where things went when they mattered, but didn't make sense yet. That evening, as the sun dropped and the orphanage changed shifts, a county inspector's car pulled up to the gate. Mrs. Hanley went pale when she saw it. Eli watched from the garage door, arms crossed, trying to read the angle of the visit. The inspector didn't walk in with a clipboard. He walked in with a manila envelope, and he smiled like he'd finally found the right place to apply pressure. The county inspector didn't step through the gate like he belonged there. He stepped through like the place owed him something. Mrs. Hanley met him halfway across the yard, hands clasped tight in front of her like a prayer she didn't believe in. Her smile was too bright, too fast, the kind she used when donors visited, and everyone suddenly remembered the boys had names. "Mr. Lasker," she said, "we weren't expecting you." "I know," the inspector replied, tapping the manila envelope against his palm. "That's usually when I find the most." Eli watched from the garage threshold. He didn't hide, but he also didn't offer himself up. He'd learned that adults like Lasker noticed you faster if you flinched. Lasker's gaze slid across the yard and landed on Eli almost immediately. Not because Eli looked guilty, because Eli looked like he could be blamed. "You," Lasker said, pointing without raising his voice. "You the one who works on the equipment?" Eli didn't move. He wiped his hands on his jeans slowly and walked out into the yard, stopping a few steps short, close enough to be heard, far enough to not be grabbed. "Yes, sir," he said. Lasker nodded as if he'd confirmed something he already knew. "Good. Then you'll want to hear this." He opened the envelope and pulled out a printed notice. He didn't wave it around. He held it steady, letting Mrs. Hanley read first. Her face changed in 3 stages: confusion, fear, control. "Oh," she said softly. This is a fire compliance review." "Emergency," Lasker corrected, "triggered by a safety complaint." Mrs. Hanley swallowed. "By who?" Lasker's eyes flicked toward Eli again. "Anonymous." Eli felt his stomach tighten, not because he thought someone had reported them, but because he recognized the smell of it. Anonymous complaints were the perfect tool. Nobody to confront, nobody to reason with, just pressure falling from a sky you couldn't argue with. "What's the timeline?" Mrs. Hanley asked. 72 hours, Lasker said, "to correct deficiencies or we suspend operations of any non-compliant structures." Mrs. Hanley's voice tightened. "Suspend operations? You mean the garage?" Lasker smiled thinly. "I mean anything with wiring, fuel, or tools. Anything with risk." The yard felt colder. Inside the building, boys pressed against windows, faces pale in the glass. They didn't know what suspension meant exactly, but they understood the tone. Adults didn't bring papers unless something was about to be taken away. Eli kept his voice level. "What deficiencies?" Lasker looked pleased to be asked, like he'd been waiting for someone to step into the role of culprit. "Extension cords used as permanent wiring," he said. "Unsecured fuel storage, improper ventilation, unauthorized repairs to county-issued equipment." Eli's jaw tightened. "We don't have county equipment." Lasker lifted a brow. "Generator." Eli felt heat rise behind his ribs. That generator was older than Eli's memory. The county had dropped it here years ago and forgotten it existed until it became useful to remember. Mrs. Hanley's smile tried to return, failed. "We're doing our best with what we have." "Your best doesn't meet code," Lasker said softly, "and code doesn't care about effort." He turned his head slightly, scanning the garage door, the shelves, the oil stains on concrete. "Who's responsible for maintenance?" he asked. Mrs. Hanley hesitated. Eli didn't. "I am," Eli said. Mrs. Hanley shot him a look, half warning, half gratitude. He'd given her a shield. He'd done it without thinking. Lasker nodded as if a box had been checked. Then I'll need access to the garage. Eli held his gaze. Now, Lasker said. Mrs. Hanley opened her mouth, then closed it. She was weighing consequences against outcomes, the way administrators always did. Eli knew how it would go. She'd try to negotiate. Lasker would refuse. And in the end, she'd comply because compliance kept funding alive. Eli stepped aside and led them into the garage. The air inside smelled like oil and cold metal. It was the only place Eli ever felt like he had control, and now a man with clean shoes was walking into it with paperwork and authority. Lasker didn't touch anything at first. He just walked slowly along the bench, eyes moving over tools, parts bins, the taped multimeter. Interesting setup, he said. Eli said nothing. Lasker stopped by the rusted tool chest in the corner, the one that had been emptied last month. He leaned down, inspected the broken lock. Burglary, he asked. Eli's voice stayed flat. Kids from the neighborhood. Happens. And you didn't report it, Lasker said. No one cares, Eli replied before he could stop himself. Lasker straightened, eyes sharpening. You'd be surprised what people care about when there's liability. Eli felt that word land. Liability. That was what this was really about. Not safety, not boys, not fire hazards, control through paperwork. Lasker moved to the generator panel by the wall and opened it without asking. He stared at the wiring inside. Who did this? He asked. Eli swallowed. I did. It didn't work. I made it work. Lasker nodded slowly. Unauthorized. Eli clenched his jaw. Necessary. Lasker looked at him for a long beat. Those words don't mean the same thing in my office. He pulled a small camera from his pocket and snapped photos. 1, 2, 3. Each click felt like a nail. Then he walked toward the back of the garage where Eli stored fuel. 2 red cans, labeled, secured as best he could, but still fuel. Still something Lasker could use. You know what happens when this place gets tagged unsafe? Lasker asked. Eli didn't answer. The county reassigns, Lasker said. Boys get dispersed, staff gets audited, funding gets frozen. Mrs. Hanley made a small sound, almost a whimper, and recovered. Lasker looked at Eli again. You want that on your conscience? Eli's throat tightened. The old trap. Take responsibility for a system that never took responsibility for you. He forced himself to speak evenly. What do you want? Lasker smiled as if Eli had finally said the right words. I want compliance, he said. And I want to know why this complaint came in right after 6 motorcycles rolled into your yard. Mrs. Hanley stiffened. Eli went cold. So Lasker had seen them, or someone had told him. He kept his face still. They needed a fix. And you provided it, Lasker said. Without charge. Eli didn't answer. Lasker stepped closer, lowering his voice as if offering kindness. You're a smart kid, but you're in over your head if you're doing favors for groups like that. Eli looked at him. I fixed a machine, Lasker nodded. Sure. And now you're associated, Mrs. Hanley interjected quickly. They were just passing through. Lasker ignored her. You have 72 hours, he said, tapping the notice against the bench. But I can make it easier. Eli's eyes narrowed. How? Lasker's smile returned, soft and dangerous. Cooperate. Tell me who they are, what they wanted, where they went. Eli felt his heart rate slow. That was his body's way of preparing for a fight he couldn't win physically. No, he said. Lasker blinked. Excuse me? Eli didn't raise his voice. I said no. Mrs. Hanley's face drained. Eli didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on Lasker. I'm not an informant, Eli said, and I'm not trading people for paperwork. Lasker's expression hardened. You're not in a position to refuse. Eli swallowed. I am. Lasker leaned in slightly. You think you're protecting them. You're not. They don't need protection. You're protecting your pride. Eli's jaw flexed. I'm protecting the boys. Lasker stared at him, then nodded slowly as if accepting a flaw in Eli's reasoning. Then you'll feel responsible when this place closes, he said. He turned, pocketing the camera, and walked toward the door. Mrs. Hanley followed him in quick, terrified steps. Please, Mr. Lasker, we can correct things. We can... Lasker stopped at the threshold and turned back just enough to make the final words hurt. "72 hours," he said. "If I don't see progress, I file for immediate suspension." "And Mrs. Hanley?" "Yes?" she whispered. He looked at the orphanage windows where boys stared like ghosts. "If your mechanic boy keeps getting involved with biker clubs," Lasker said, "your funding problem will become a criminal problem." Then he left. The yard stayed silent long after his car pulled away. Mrs. Hanley stood near the gate, hands shaking. She looked older than she had an hour ago. Eli walked back into the garage and shut the door. Not hard, just final. He leaned against it again, forehead on metal, trying to steady his breathing. He'd refused money because he didn't want strings. Now he had strings anyway, only these were wrapped around the whole building. He opened the drawer with the multimeter and saw the folded paper again. Paid in full. Eli stared at it, then pulled it out and unfolded it carefully, as if it might explain itself if he treated it gently. He didn't believe in signs, but he believed in timing. He reached for the old flip phone number the leader had given him yesterday, still written on the back of a bolt package, smudged but readable, and hesitated. Calling them would be asking, not for money, for involvement, and involvement was exactly what Eli had spent his life avoiding. He thought of the boys in the windows. He thought of Lasker's smile. Then he made the choice that turned his stomach and steadied his hands at the same time. He dialed. When the call picked up, he didn't introduce himself. He just said the truth, flat and quiet. "A county inspector's trying to shut the orphanage down." And then, after a beat, he added the part that mattered most. "I didn't take your money." The call didn't last long. Eli expected questions, names, demands. Instead, there was just breathing on the other end for a few seconds, steady and unhurried, like the man listening already knew where this would lead. "How much time?" the leader asked. 72 hours, Eli said. "Maybe less if he pushes." A pause, not doubt, calculation. "You alone?" the leader asked. Eli looked around the garage, the shelves he'd built, the empty corner where the tool chest used to be, the door with the warped hinge he kept meaning to fix. "Yes," he said, "and I didn't take your money." Another pause. "We noticed," the leader replied. The line went dead. Eli stayed where he was for a moment, phone still against his ear, listening to nothing. Then he slid it back into his pocket and got back to work, because waiting without doing something felt like inviting fear to sit down. That afternoon, the orphanage changed its posture. Mrs. Hanley gathered the boys in the common room and spoke in her careful voice, the one that turned bad news into something that sounded temporary. She said words like inspection, compliance, safety review. The boys heard closure. They always did. Eli watched from the doorway. He didn't speak. He never did during meetings. Meetings were where adults made decisions and children learned how little input mattered. Afterward, Mrs. Hanley pulled him aside. "You shouldn't have antagonized him," she said quietly, eyes darting toward the windows. Eli didn't argue. "I answered questions." "You refused to cooperate," she said. Eli met her gaze. "I refused to trade people," she sighed. "You don't understand how these things work." Eli nodded. "I do. I just don't agree." That night, the garage lights stayed on later than usual. Eli worked through the checklist Lasker had left behind, knowing it wouldn't be enough. Some things couldn't be fixed without money. Others couldn't be fixed at all, not without admitting that the county had neglected this place for years. At midnight, headlights swept across the yard. Eli stiffened, then relaxed slightly when he recognized the sound. Bikes, not 6 this time, 3. They rolled in quiet, engines cut early, momentum carrying them the last few feet like ghosts. The leader dismounted first. No jacket this time, just a dark shirt, sleeves rolled, hands bare. Eli stepped out to meet them. "You came fast," Eli said. The leader nodded. "We were close." The other 2 bikers stayed near the fence, eyes scanning the perimeter without looking like they were scanning. Professionals didn't need to announce attention. "What did he threaten?" the leader asked. "Suspension," Eli said. "Dispersal. Funding freeze." The leader's jaw tightened. "Names?" "Lasker. County." The leader nodded once, filing it away. "You still don't want money," he said. Eli shook his head. "I want this place open." The leader studied him for a long moment, then looked toward the building. Lights were on in the dorm windows. Shadows moved inside. life continuing under pressure like it always did here. "We don't buy outcomes," the leader said finally. "We change conditions." Eli didn't like the sound of that any more than he had earlier. "I don't want anyone hurt," the leader met his eyes. "Neither do we." That wasn't reassurance, it was clarification. One of the bikers, thick forearms, scar along his knuckle, spoke for the first time. "Inspector come alone?" "Yes," Eli said, "for now." The biker nodded. "They always do first." "What does that mean?" Eli asked. The leader answered. "It means he's testing leverage, seeing who bends." "And if nobody bends?" Eli asked. The leader's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Then leverage changes hands." They didn't go inside the garage. They didn't touch anything. They didn't make promises. They left 5 minutes later, engines rolling out slow and controlled, like before. Eli stood in the yard long after they were gone, staring at the fence, wondering what conditions meant in the hands of people who didn't use money the way everyone else did. The next morning, the first condition changed. A city utility truck pulled up unannounced. 2 men in orange vests got out and walked the perimeter, checking meters, tapping on panels. They didn't speak to anyone. They didn't look at the boys. By noon, a fire marshal arrived, different from Lasker, older, tired eyes. He walked through the garage with a checklist, nodded at Eli's fixes, frowned at the wiring, then made a call outside. An hour later, he came back in and shook his head. "Some of this should have been flagged years ago," he said quietly. "I don't know how it slipped." Eli didn't answer. The marshal lowered his voice. "You didn't hear this from me. But the complaint that triggered this review, it got reviewed, found procedural issues." "What kind?" Eli asked. The marshal glanced toward the door. "The kind that make people nervous." He left without filing anything. By evening, Mrs. Hanley was pacing instead of panicking. "They postponed the suspension hearing," she whispered to Eli like it was a secret she didn't trust. "They said there were inconsistencies." Eli nodded slowly. The second condition changed that night. The kids who'd been stealing from the garage stopped coming around, not because they were scared, because someone else was watching now. Eli noticed it in the quiet, in the way footsteps no longer lingered outside the fence, in the way the broken lock on the tool chest was suddenly replaced, not with a new chest, but with a better hinge on the door and a reinforced latch on the gate. No note, no explanation, just fewer problems. On the third day, Lasker returned. This time he didn't bring an envelope. He brought a partner. They walked the yard together, voices low, eyes sharp. Lasker's smile was thinner now, less confident. When he saw Eli, it faltered for just a fraction of a second. "You've been busy," Lasker said. Eli shrugged. "Same as always." Lasker didn't laugh. "Funny. A lot of things resolve themselves." Eli said nothing. They went into the garage. Lasker checked the generator panel again. The wiring was the same, but the citations he'd expected to lean on weren't there anymore. The paper trail had been interrupted, rerouted, questioned. "Who helped you?" Lasker asked quietly. Eli met his gaze. "I fixed what I could." Lasker's partner shifted, uncomfortable. "We'll need more time." Lasker clenched his jaw, then nodded. "Yes, more time." They left without threats this time. Mrs. Hanley collapsed into a chair afterward, exhausted. "I don't understand what's happening," she said. Eli didn't explain. He didn't want to owe her that truth. That evening, as the sun dropped and the yard filled with the sounds of dinner and laughter trying to pretend nothing was wrong, Eli found something on his workbench. Not money, a new torque wrench, high quality, clean, expensive, no note, just placed exactly where his old one used to sit. Eli stared at it for a long time. Then he picked it up, tested the weight, the balance, the quiet precision of it. He set it back down. And for the first time since this started, he felt something close to anger. Because this wasn't payment. This was understanding. And understanding was harder to refuse than cash. He closed the drawer slowly, the torque wrench inside, and realized the truth he'd been trying not to see. The club wasn't paying him back. They were rewriting the rules around him. And once rules changed, they didn't always change back. He pulled the garage door shut for the night, listening to the latch click into place. Somewhere beyond the fence, engines moved through the dark, not leaving, positioning. The wrench didn't fix the feeling. Eli tried to pretend it was just another tool, another object dropped into his world without explanation. He used it the next morning to torque a head bolt on an old lawn tractor the groundskeeper had dragged in overnight. It worked perfectly, smooth, precise, no slip. Too perfect. He wiped it clean and set it back in the drawer. The orphanage woke up into a strange kind of calm. Not relief. Vigilance without panic. Mrs. Hanley moved through the halls like someone afraid to breathe too deeply in case the air changed its mind. The boys followed routines more closely than usual, like structure itself had become a shield. By mid-morning, the second pressure arrived, not from the county, from the bank. Mrs. Hanley called Eli into her office just after lunch. The blinds were half closed, the light cutting her desk into bright and shadowed halves. She didn't ask him to sit. They froze the discretionary account, she said. Eli nodded once. He'd expected that. For what reason? Review, she said. Always review. She looked at him, searching his face. This is about the inspection. It's about leverage, Eli replied. She winced. You sound older than you should. Eli didn't answer. She rubbed her temples. If they don't release it, we can't cover repairs, supplies, the insurance rider. Eli's jaw tightened. They want you to fold. They want control, she said, which is not the same thing. It is when you're standing under it, Eli said. She studied him carefully. What did you ask those bikers to do? Eli met her gaze. Nothing. She didn't believe him, but she didn't press. Mrs. Hanley was good at surviving systems. She knew when a question could cost her more than an answer. That afternoon, a man Eli had never seen before showed up at the gate. Mid-40s, clean jacket, no uniform. The kind of person who smiled with their eyes while their mouth stayed neutral. He didn't try to come inside. He waited until Eli noticed him and walked over. You the mechanic? The man asked. Eli didn't offer his name. What's broken? The man smiled faintly. Nothing mechanical. Eli felt it then, the shift. The kind that meant this wasn't about wires or fuel. What do you want? Eli asked. To talk, the man said. Somewhere quieter. Eli glanced back at the building, then at the garage. He shook his head. Say it here. The man nodded, unbothered. Fair. He lowered his voice. I represent interests concerned about recent activity around this facility. Eli stared at him. You mean the inspection? And the motorcycles, the man added gently. Eli's shoulders squared. They got a repair. They got more than that, the man said. They got access. Eli didn't argue. Silence was better than denial when someone already thought they knew the answer. The man continued. You're in a delicate position. You don't have legal standing here. You're a minor, a ward, easily reclassified if necessary. Eli felt anger rise, cold and steady. You threatening me? The man smiled again. I'm explaining gravity. Eli took a breath. Say what you want. The man nodded. You stop facilitating their presence. You stop answering calls. You stop being useful. And if I don't? Eli asked. The man's smile faded just a touch. Then the bank freeze becomes permanent. The inspection escalates. And you, he paused, choosing his words carefully, become a variable we remove. Eli's hands curled into fists, then relaxed. He forced his voice to stay level. You don't remove people. The man tilted his head. We relocate them. Eli stared at him. You're not from the county. No, the man agreed. We're from the part that cleans up after the county. He took a step back. Think about it. You want to protect this place? Don't turn it into a battlefield. He turned and walked away without waiting for a response. Eli stood by the fence long after he was gone, replaying every word. This was the cost he'd feared, not violence, reassignment. Paperwork sharp enough to cut through anything he built. That night, the bikes came again. All 6 this time. They didn't roll into the yard. They stopped outside the fence, engines idling, lights low. The leader waited until Eli came to them. You talked to someone today, the leader said. Eli didn't ask how he knew. Yes. What did they offer? The leader asked. Silence, Eli replied. In exchange for disappearance. The leader nodded slowly. And? I said nothing, Eli said, which usually means no. The leader studied him. They'll push harder. I know, Eli said. That's why I need this to stop. The leader raised an eyebrow. Stop? Whatever you're doing, Eli said. I didn't ask for it, and it's putting a target on the place. The leader didn't react immediately. He looked past Eli at the orphanage, at the lights, the windows, the boys inside trying to live like tomorrow wasn't fragile. You refused money, the leader said. You didn't refuse consequence. Eli swallowed. I didn't agree to this. No, the leader said. You stood your ground. That's agreement enough for the world we live in. Eli shook his head. I don't want protection. I want neutrality. The leader's mouth twitched, not amused. Neutrality is a luxury. You don't have it. One of the bikers shifted, uncomfortable. Boss, the leader raised a hand. He's not wrong to ask. He looked back at Eli. If we step back, they step forward, harder, cleaner. Then let them, Eli said. I'll deal with it. The leader's eyes sharpened. You can't. Eli met his gaze. Then teach me how. Silence stretched. This was the moment the leader weighed him, not as a kid, not as a mechanic, but as someone who might carry weight if he survived long enough. You don't pay us, the leader said slowly, and we don't own you. Eli nodded. Good. But when we close a ledger, the leader continued, we don't leave it half open. Eli felt the implications settle. Someone's going to get hurt. The leader shook his head. Someone's going to get exposed. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. The man who talked to you? He's not as clean as he sounds. Eli frowned. You've checked. The leader didn't answer directly. You're not the first place he's leaned on. Eli's chest tightened. And those places didn't have anyone who refused money, the leader said. Eli looked away, then back. I don't want favors. The leader nodded. Then don't call them favors. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thin folder. Not money, paper. Open it, he said. Eli hesitated, then did. Inside were copies, bank records, inspection timelines, complaint logs, patterns highlighted, names repeated, Lasker's, the man from the gate, connections. Eli didn't fully understand but could feel the weight of. What is this? Eli asked. Conditions, the leader said, the ones that keep happening to places like yours. Eli flipped a page, hands steady but heart racing. Why show me? Because you said you wanted neutrality, the leader replied. This is what stands in the way. Eli closed the folder slowly. You want me to use this? No, the leader said. We want you to decide. Decide what? Eli asked. Whether this place stays small and quiet and breakable, the leader said, or whether it learns how to stand without paying tribute. Eli stared at the folder, at the weight of knowledge, at the door he hadn't meant to open. If I do nothing, Eli said. The leader mounted his bike. Then this ends the way it always does. And if I do something? Eli asked. The leader started the engine. Then it won't be clean. The bikes pulled away, engines low and controlled, leaving Eli alone at the fence with a folder he hadn't asked for and a choice he couldn't unsee. Inside, a boy laughed at something stupid and bright. Eli closed his eyes for a moment. Then he turned back toward the garage, the folder tucked under his arm, knowing one thing with painful clarity. Refusing money hadn't kept him out of the fight. It had only decided which kind of fight this would be. He locked the garage door behind him and set the folder on the bench, unopened again, like a loaded tool he wasn't ready to use. Yet. And somewhere beyond the fence, someone was already preparing the next move. The folder didn't stay closed. Eli told himself it would. He finished his work that night the way he always did, methodical, quiet, pretending routine could outlast pressure. He swept the floor. He drained the old oil pan. He locked the tool drawer and checked the latch twice, like that could keep the world from reaching inside. But when the orphanage lights went out and the building settled into its uneven breathing, Eli sat alone at the bench and opened the folder again. It wasn't explosive. That was the worst part. No single page screamed corruption, no headline crime, just patterns, dates lining up too cleanly, inspections that always followed certain calls, accounts frozen, then unfrozen, then frozen again. Facilities like St. Agnes, small, underfunded, compliant, appearing again and again at the edges of someone else's leverage. Lasker's name threaded through it all like a spine, not always signing, not always leading, but always present. Eli leaned back against the bench and stared at the ceiling. He'd grown up thinking power was loud, Raised voices, slammed doors, hands on shoulders. This was quieter. This was paperwork that moved children without ever touching them. By morning, the orphanage felt watched, not by bikes, not by county cars, by absence. The utility truck didn't come back, the marshal didn't return, Lasker didn't call. Silence stretched tight, like someone waiting to see if Eli would flinch first. Mrs. Hanley flinched for both of them. She pulled Eli aside before breakfast, voice low, eyes darting. "I got a call. From Central Administration." Eli nodded. "About funding." "They said they're reassessing partnerships," she said, "which means they're looking for an excuse." Eli didn't correct her. "What do you need?" She hesitated. "I need this to calm down." Eli met her gaze. "It won't," she sighed. "Then I need you to stop being visible." There it was. The request people always made of kids like him: disappear quietly so the adults could survive. "I can't," Eli said. Mrs. Hanley closed her eyes for a moment. "Then I need you to be careful." He nodded. That was something he could give her. By noon, the careful part was already failing. A black sedan parked across the street from the orphanage and stayed there too long to be coincidence. No plates visible from the gate, windows tinted just enough to make guessing pointless. Eli noticed because noticing was his default. He watched from the garage doorway, counting minutes, measuring the angle of the car relative to the fence. It didn't move. The younger boys noticed too. They always did, even when they pretended not to. Fear traveled faster among kids than adults like to admit. Eli closed the garage door and walked back to the bench. He didn't reach for the folder this time. He reached for the phone. The leader answered on the second ring. "They're watching," Eli said. No greeting, no apology. "I know," the leader replied. That landed heavier than Eli expected. "How?" Eli asked. "Because they're sloppy when they think they've already won," the leader said. "And because the man who spoke to you yesterday made 2 calls he shouldn't have." Eli felt his stomach tighten. "What kind of calls?" "Ones that leave records," the leader replied. "And records don't like light." Eli exhaled slowly. "I told you I don't want this to get violent." The leader's voice stayed level. "This isn't violence." "It feels like it," Eli said. "That's because you're standing in the middle of it," the leader replied. "Everything feels like pressure from there." Eli leaned his forehead against the cool metal of the workbench. "What are you doing?" "We're doing what you won't," the leader said. "We're making it impossible for them to pretend this is routine." Eli straightened. "By exposing them." "Yes." "And then what?" Eli asked. "They don't just go away." "No," the leader agreed. "They adapt." Eli swallowed. "So do we." Silence followed. Not on the line, inside Eli. He was crossing another threshold, from reaction to intention. "I don't want them to come after the boys," Eli said. "They won't," the leader replied. "Not directly. That's not how men like Lasker work." "And me?" Eli asked. The leader didn't answer right away. "They already are," he said finally. The sedan left an hour later, not fast, not obvious, just gone. The next day, the pressure changed shape. Instead of inspections, letters arrived, notices requesting documentation, requests for interviews, language that sounded neutral but carried teeth if you knew how to read it. Mrs. Hanley started losing weight. Eli started sleeping in the garage, not officially. He told himself it was about late repairs, about being closer to the tools. The truth was simpler. If something went wrong, he wanted to be the first one it hit. That night, the bikes came back without entering the yard. The leader waited by the fence. Eli met him there, folder under his arm. "I read it all," Eli said. The leader nodded. "Good. There are kids like us," Eli said, "other places." "Yes," the leader said. "They don't have mechanics," Eli said. "They don't have anyone to notice patterns." The leader watched him carefully. "You're not responsible for everyone." Eli shook his head. "I know, but I'm responsible for this." He tapped the fence lightly, the orphanage behind it, the boys inside. "If I use this," Eli said, "it doesn't stop with Lasker." "No," the leader agreed. "It spreads." "And if I don't?" Eli asked. The leader didn't hesitate. "Then they'll isolate this place, shut it down quietly, and move on." Eli closed his eyes for a moment. He thought of the tool chest that had been emptied, of the torque wrench he hadn't asked for, of the boys who waved at bikes like they were myths passing through. When you fix something, Eli said slowly, you don't just replace the broken part. You find out why it failed. The leader's mouth twitched. That's true. Eli met his gaze. I want to fix the cause. The leader nodded once. Then you don't do it alone. Eli took a breath. I don't want to join you. The leader smiled faintly. We're not recruiting. Good, Eli said, because I'm not a biker. No, the leader replied. You're worse. Eli frowned. You understand systems, the leader said. That makes you dangerous. They stood in silence for a moment, the fence between them, the city beyond that. What happens next? Eli asked. The leader looked down the road where headlights passed without slowing. Next, we let them make a move. And then? Eli pressed. And then, the leader said, you decide how public this gets. Eli felt the weight of that choice settle. Public meant exposure. Exposure meant protection, but also scrutiny. It meant the boys wouldn't disappear quietly, but it also meant they'd be known. I need time, Eli said. The leader nodded. You have some. Not much, Eli added. No, the leader agreed. Not much. He turned back toward his bike. Before mounting, he paused. You refused our money, he said. Most people don't. Eli shrugged. It wasn't clean. The leader looked at him, eyes steady. Nothing that matters ever is. The bike rolled away, quiet and controlled. Eli stayed at the fence long after, watching the road, listening to the orphanage behind him breathe through the night. Inside, the folder felt heavier now, not because of what it contained, because of what he was starting to understand. The club wasn't paying him back. They were giving him a choice, and whatever he chose next would change more than just this place. The first leak wasn't dramatic. It didn't hit the news. It didn't trend. It didn't even have a name yet. It showed up as an email sent to the wrong address. Eli noticed it because the printer in Mrs. Hanley's office coughed at 3 in the morning and started spitting paper like it was choking. He was asleep on the cot in the garage when it happened, half dreaming about torque specs and broken locks. The sound pulled him up instantly. He crossed the yard barefoot, hoodie pulled tight, and stepped into the office to find the printer still warm. 3 pages, all stamped confidential in gray that wasn't as light as it pretended to be. He didn't read them all. He didn't need to. The header was enough. Internal review, county facilities oversight subject, procedural deviations, Lasker, R. Eli stood there for a long moment, paper trembling slightly in his hands. Not fear, adrenaline, the quiet kind that made the world narrow. Someone had routed a draft where it wasn't supposed to go, not accident, signal. He folded the pages carefully and slid them back into the printer tray, then unplugged the machine. He left the office exactly as he'd found it, down to the angle of the chair. By sunrise, the phone started ringing. Not his. Mrs. Hanley's. She answered the first call with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, the second with clipped politeness. By the third, she stopped smiling altogether. Eli listened from the doorway, reading her posture the way he read engines. Of course, she said. Yes, we'll cooperate. No, we haven't been contacted. I understand. She hung up and rubbed her face. They're asking questions, she said quietly. Eli nodded. Different ones? She looked at him. Yes. That was how he knew it had started. The sedan came back that afternoon, not the same one. New plates, same intent. This time, it didn't stay across the street. It pulled right up to the gate. 2 men got out. One of them was the man from before, the one who talked about gravity. The other was younger, sharper, eyes always moving, like he was afraid to miss the moment everything went wrong. They didn't ask to come in. They assumed. Mrs. Hanley stepped forward before Eli could. This is a restricted facility. The older man smiled. We know. He glanced at Eli. You've been busy. Eli didn't answer. We're here to offer a solution, the man continued. This situation has escalated. Eli crossed his arms. You escalated it. The younger man bristled. Careful. Eli met his eyes. You first. The older man raised a hand slightly. Let's stay constructive. He turned back to Eli. There's an internal review. It's getting attention. Attention makes people nervous. That's not my problem, Eli said. It is, if you care about this place, the man replied. Mrs. Hanley's voice shook. What do you want? The man didn't look at her. We want him removed from operational responsibility. Eli laughed once, short, sharp. You mean you want me gone? Temporarily, the man said. Relocation program, apprenticeship, somewhere far enough that this cools off. Eli shook his head. No. The younger man stepped forward. This isn't a negotiation. Eli felt the fence at his back, the building behind him, the boys inside who hadn't asked for any of this. It is for me, Eli said. The older man sighed. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Eli leaned in slightly. You're making it visible. That landed. The older man's smile slipped just enough to show teeth. You think you're protected, he said. Eli shrugged. I think you're exposed. The younger man reached into his jacket, not for a weapon, for a phone. He checked it, frowned, then looked at the older man and shook his head once. Something shifted. The older man straightened. This conversation isn't over. Eli nodded. No, it's just not going your way. They left without another word. Mrs. Hanley sank onto the steps when they were gone. What did you do? She whispered. Eli sat beside her, elbows on knees. I didn't disappear. That night, the leader called Eli without being prompted. They tried to move you, he said. Yes, Eli replied. They failed, the leader said. For now, Eli answered. The leader paused. You saw the draft. Eli didn't ask how he knew. Yes. You understand what that means, the leader said. Eli stared out at the dark yard. It means this isn't about us anymore. No, the leader agreed. It's about them. And if it goes public? Eli asked. The leader didn't answer immediately. Then the review becomes a shield and a weapon. Eli closed his eyes. I don't want collateral damage. There already is, the leader said quietly. Eli thought of Mrs. Hanley's shaking hands, of the boys listening through doors, of systems that moved children like pieces because it was easier than fixing the board. What do you need from me? Eli asked. The leader's voice stayed steady. Nothing you don't already have. Eli understood. They weren't asking him to speak. They were waiting to see if he would refuse to stay silent when silence became convenient again. The next morning, a reporter showed up. Local paper, not big, not flashy. She stood at the gate with a notebook and waited. Eli watched from the garage, heart steady, mind racing. This was the line. Once crossed, it couldn't be uncrossed. Mrs. Hanley saw her too. Eli, she whispered, if you talk. I know, Eli said. He walked toward the gate anyway. The reporter looked up, surprised. I'm looking for someone who can explain why a county inspector is under internal review after threatening to shut down a children's facility. Eli took a breath. He didn't mention the club. He didn't mention money. He talked about wiring that hadn't been fixed in years, about generators that were forgotten until they failed, about how inspections arrived only when someone needed leverage. He talked about patterns. He didn't accuse, he described. The reporter wrote fast. When she left, Eli felt lighter and heavier at the same time. That evening, the orphanage was quieter than usual. No laughter, no music, just waiting. The leader didn't call that night. He didn't need to. Eli knew the next move wouldn't come from the shadows. It would come in daylight, with titles, with statements, with consequences. He lay back on the cot in the garage and stared at the ceiling, listening to the building breathe. He hadn't joined the club. He hadn't taken the money. But he'd done something far more dangerous. He'd made it impossible for this to be handled quietly. And in a world that survived on quiet harm, that was the kind of noise people never forgave. The article didn't explode. It spread. Eli learned the difference by noon. The reporter's piece ran online first, tucked between zoning disputes and a human interest story about a dog rescue. No headline screaming corruption, no photos of bikes or fences, just a clean, careful write-up that used words like timeline, discrepancy, retaliatory inspection, enough to make the right people uncomfortable. By mid-afternoon, Mrs. Hanley's phone rang again. This time, she didn't answer immediately. She stared at the screen like it might blink first. It's the county, she said quietly. Eli nodded. Different number? Yes. That's good, he said. She picked up. Eli didn't listen to the words. He watched her posture, the way her shoulders lifted, then slowly dropped. the way she stopped pacing and leaned against the desk like her legs had decided to forgive her. When she hung up, she looked at him with something between relief and fear. "They're suspending the inspection," she said, "pending review." Eli exhaled once. "Pending isn't permanent." "No," she agreed, "but it buys time." Time was currency now. That evening the bikes didn't come. Not outside the fence, not down the road. Nothing. The absence was deliberate. Eli noticed the other absences too. The sedan didn't return. The man who talked about gravity didn't call. Lasker didn't send follow-ups. The system had gone quiet. Quiet wasn't peace. Quiet was regrouping. Eli spent the night fixing things that didn't matter. Tightening hinges, replacing cracked outlet covers, aligning a door that had always scraped the frame. Work he'd put off because it didn't change outcomes. Now he needed it to keep his hands busy. Near midnight, his phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. "You've escalated." Eli stared at it, then typed back. "You already did." The reply came a minute later. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Eli looked around the garage, the bench, the tools, the cot, the walls that had listened to him think for years. He typed, "Neither do you." The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then nothing. The next morning, the next wave arrived. Not men. Lawyers. 2 of them showed up just after breakfast, crisp suits out of place against peeling paint. They carried folders thick enough to be used as shields and spoke in measured tones that assumed compliance without asking for it. "We represent the county," the taller one said. Mrs. Hanley met them at the door. "You can't just—" "We can," the shorter one replied pleasantly. "And we are." They requested documents, access, interviews. They asked for Eli by name. That was new. They sat across from him in the office, notebooks open, pens aligned. Eli stayed standing. "You understand you're not authorized to act as a spokesperson," the taller one said. Eli nodded. "I didn't." "You spoke to the press," the shorter one said. "I answered questions," Eli replied. They exchanged a look. "You made allegations," the taller one continued. "I described patterns," Eli said. "Those are different." The shorter lawyer smiled thinly. "You're very articulate for someone in your position." Eli met his eyes. "I had to be." They asked about the bikes. Eli didn't deny the repair. He didn't embellish it either. He talked about alternators and voltage regulators like that was all there was. They asked about the folder. Eli didn't acknowledge it. They asked about who he'd spoken to. Eli named the reporter, no one else. After an hour, the taller lawyer closed his notebook. "You've complicated matters." Eli nodded. That was the idea. They left without threats, without conclusions. Mrs. Hanley sank into a chair afterward. "They're building a case," she whispered. Eli nodded. "So are we." That afternoon, the fire marshal came back. Same man, same tired eyes. This time he brought coffee. "I shouldn't be here," he said quietly, setting the cup down on the workbench. "Off the record." Eli leaned against the bench. "Then why are you?" The marshal hesitated. "Because I don't like being used to scare kids." He handed Eli a folded document, not official, no letterhead. "Inspection history," he said. "Unredacted." Eli unfolded it slowly. Names, dates, notes that didn't match actions. Lasker again. "You didn't get this from me," the marshal said. Eli nodded. "I won't say you did." The marshal hesitated at the door. "You should know, once this gets formal, it'll get ugly." Eli met his gaze. "It already is." That night, the bikes came back. Not to the orphanage, to the street beyond it. Eli saw the lights first, moving slow, controlled. 6 bikes, spaced wide, not blocking traffic but influencing it. A statement without words. The leader waited by his bike when Eli walked out. "You're past the point of stepping back," the leader said. Eli nodded. "I know." "You ready for what comes next?" the leader asked. Eli thought about the lawyers, the texts, the way the county's voice had changed from authority to defense. "No," he said honestly, "but I'm here." The leader studied him. "They'll try to isolate you." "They already did," Eli said. "They'll try to discredit you," the leader continued. "They can't change the wiring," Eli replied. "Or the dates," the leader nodded. "They'll go after the place instead." Eli's jaw tightened. "Then they'll have to do it in daylight." The leader's mouth twitched. That's what scares them. He handed Eli a small flash drive. Everything we have, time-stamped, verified. Eli took it. I didn't ask for this. No, the leader agreed. You earned it. Eli looked down at the drive. If I use this, the leader finished the sentence, you don't control the fallout. Eli slipped it into his pocket. I never did. They stood there for a moment, engines idling around them, the city pretending not to notice. What happens if this burns down? Eli asked quietly. The leader looked past him at the orphanage windows, glowing soft in the dark. Then at least it burns where people can see it, he said. The bikes pulled away, dispersing into the grid like they'd never been there. Eli stayed on the sidewalk long after, the flash drive warm in his pocket. He'd refused money because he didn't want debt. Now he understood the real cost. This wasn't about payment, it was about whether he'd let the truth be processed quietly or whether he'd force it to be seen, even if it scorched everything around it. Inside the building, a boy laughed. Eli turned back toward the garage, knowing the next part wouldn't be about fixing. It would be about standing still while the world tried to move him anyway. The subpoena arrived on a Thursday. Not served, not announced. Just slipped into Mrs. Hanley's mailbox like a bill. Eli found it when he went out to take the trash after dinner. The envelope was thicker than the rest, heavier in a way that had nothing to do with paper. Official seal, county return address, no urgency stamp, no threat language, just inevitability. He carried it inside without opening it and set it on the counter. Mrs. Hanley saw it immediately. Her shoulders sagged before she even touched it. That's it, she said softly. That's the turn. Eli waited while she opened it. He watched her eyes move, line by line, the way people read when they're trying to stay upright. They want records, she said. Maintenance logs, financials, staff communications. They want interviews. Eli nodded. They're building distance. From what? She asked. From him, Eli said. From Lasker. She looked up sharply. So they're admitting? No, Eli said. They're isolating. He took the envelope and read it himself. It was clean, precise. Everything done by procedure. If you didn't know how pressure worked, you'd think it was fair. They want me, Mrs. Hanley said quietly. Eli folded the letter back into the envelope. They want everyone. That night, the orphanage didn't sleep. Not because anyone was loud, because everyone was listening. The boys whispered in hallways. Staff spoke in corners. Phones buzzed and went quiet. Eli stayed in the garage, sitting on the bench with the flash drive in his pocket, the folder open in front of him, the torque wrench untouched. He didn't call the leader. He didn't need to. The next morning, the second shoe dropped. Lasker resigned. Not fired, not suspended. Resigned. The county released a statement just before noon. Personal reasons. No admission of wrongdoing. Full cooperation with internal review. By lunch, the narrative had shifted. The problem wasn't corruption, it was process confusion, it was communication breakdown, it was isolated misjudgment. Mrs. Hanley read the article out loud in her office, voice flat. They're turning him into a buffer. Eli nodded. They're sealing the breach. And us? She asked. Eli didn't answer immediately. Us, he said finally, is where they prove they still have control. The subpoenas multiplied. County oversight, fire department, financial compliance, each one narrow, each one justified, together, suffocating. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic, just too much to survive without resources. By the end of the week, Mrs. Hanley was sleeping in her office. Eli stopped going inside at all. The man who talked about gravity showed up again on Saturday, not at the gate, at the garage. Eli heard him before he saw him, footsteps too measured to belong. He didn't turn right away. You're persistent, the man said. Eli kept tightening the bolt he was working on. You're trespassing. The man smiled faintly. We're past that. Eli straightened and faced him. Say what you came to say. The man nodded. You won. Eli waited. You forced a resignation, the man continued. You embarrassed the county. You made noise. And now? Eli asked. And now, the man said, we clean up. Eli crossed his arms. By shutting us down. By reorganizing, the man corrected. New management, new structure, new placement for residents. Eli felt something go still inside him. You're moving the boys. Yes, the man said calmly. It's unfortunate, but necessary. Eli stared at him. They didn't do anything. No, the man agreed. They're just mobile. Eli took a slow breath. You think I'll let that happen quietly? The man's eyes hardened. I think you don't have a choice. Eli shook his head. You're wrong. The man tilted his head. You've already played your hand. Eli reached into his pocket and pulled out the flash drive. He held it up, not offering it, just letting it exist between them. You sure about that? Eli asked. The man's gaze flicked to it. Just for a second. That was enough. Careful, the man said. That road doesn't end well. Eli's voice stayed even. Neither does yours. The man studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're not the hero here, he said. You're the inconvenience. Eli nodded. That's usually where things change. The man stepped back. You release that, you lose control of the story. Eli met his gaze. I never had it. The man turned and walked away without another word. That night, the leader finally called. They're moving the kids, he said. Yes, Eli replied. They're forcing the reset, the leader continued. Clean hands and new names. Eli stared at the garage wall. I know, silence stretched. You still don't want money, the leader said. Eli almost smiled. No. You want them to stay, the leader said. Yes. The leader exhaled slowly. Then this gets loud. How loud? Eli asked. The leader didn't answer right away. Loud enough that they can't pretend it's routine. Eli closed his eyes. He pictured the boys' faces, the windows, the fence. Do it, he said. The leader's voice hardened. Once it's out, there's no pulling it back. I know, Eli said. Release everything. The call ended. The upload took 3 minutes. Documents, timelines, emails, audio, patterns laid bare without commentary. No accusations, no editorials, just evidence. By morning, it was everywhere it needed to be, not viral, unignorable. The county issued a second statement before noon, then a third. By evening, the story had shifted again, not to Eli, not to the club, to the system. Emergency hearings were scheduled, transfers paused, temporary injunctions filed. The boys weren't moved, not yet. Eli stood in the garage doorway as news vans parked down the street. He didn't step into frame. He didn't give interviews. He just watched. Mrs. Hanley stood beside him, hands clasped, eyes wet. You burned the bridge, she whispered. Eli nodded. They were going to burn it anyway. She looked at him. What happens to you now? Eli thought about the bikes, the road, the way the leader had looked at him the first day. I don't know, he said honestly. Outside the fence, engines passed, not stopping, not leaving, waiting. Eli felt the weight of what he'd done settle fully now. He hadn't taken the club's money, so they'd paid him back with truth. And truth, once released, didn't care who stood in the way, not even him. The noise arrived without warning, not sirens, not engines, people. By the next morning, the street outside the orphanage wasn't empty anymore. News vans idled at the corners. Cameras pointed at the gate like it might confess. Reporters waited with notebooks open and microphones dead, unsure who would be brave or desperate enough to speak first. Eli stayed in the garage. That was his position now, not hiding, anchoring. Mrs. Hanley tried to keep the boys inside, but curiosity leaked through walls, faces pressed to windows, whispers carried down halls. For the first time, the world was looking at a place that had survived by not being seen. The county responded fast, too fast to be clean. By noon, an interim administrator arrived, not Lasker's replacement, someone above that, older, sharper, no smile at all. She walked through the building with a clipboard and a practiced air of neutrality, followed by 2 aides who took notes like they were transcribing a language they didn't speak. She asked to see Eli, not privately, in the open. They stood in the courtyard where cameras could see silhouettes but not hear words. You caused a disruption, she said. Eli nodded. I interrupted a process. Processes exist for a reason, she replied. So do failures, Eli said. She studied him. You're young. Yes, Eli said. You don't understand how much damage this can do, she continued. Eli looked past her at the building. I understand exactly how much damage not doing it would have done. She didn't argue that. She pivoted. We're freezing external involvement, she said. No third parties, no clubs, no advocacy groups. Eli met her gaze. That's not how this started. It is how it ends, she said. Eli shook his head slowly. You don't get to decide that alone. Her eyes narrowed. You think you have leverage? Eli didn't answer right away. He reached into his pocket and pulled out nothing. No, he said. I think you do. She frowned. You've got cameras outside a children's home, Eli continued. You've got hearings scheduled before facts are settled, and you've got boys who are old enough to know when adults are lying to keep control. He leaned forward slightly. You can end this quietly, or you can let it keep breathing. The administrator held his gaze for a long moment, then she turned to her aides. Pause the transfer orders, she said. The aides hesitated. She looked at them. That's not a request. They nodded and wrote it down. She turned back to Eli. This doesn't make you untouchable. Eli nodded. I know. She walked away without another word. That afternoon, the man who talked about gravity was arrested. Not publicly, not ceremonially, just removed. The charge wasn't related to the orphanage. It never was. Financial misconduct, influence peddling, the kind of thing that only surfaced once people started pulling threads they'd avoided for years. Eli heard about it from a reporter who tried to corner him at the gate. Did you know this would happen? She asked. Eli didn't stop walking. I knew something would. Are you working with that biker club? She pressed. Eli turned just enough to look at her. I worked with the truth. That quote ran later that night. The leader didn't call. He didn't need to. Eli felt the shift anyway. The pressure was easing, not disappearing, just redistributing. The system was shedding weight, sacrificing pieces to protect the structure. That was how it always survived. That evening, Mrs. Hanley joined Eli in the garage. They're offering me a choice, she said quietly. Eli looked up. What kind? Step down, she said, voluntarily, in exchange for stability. Eli nodded. They need a face to change. And if I don't? She asked. They'll find a reason, Eli said. She looked around the garage. You know I stayed because of kids like you. Eli swallowed. I know, she smiled sadly. Then maybe this is the right moment. She handed him an envelope. What's that? Eli asked. My resignation, she said. Not signed yet. Eli stared at it. You don't owe them that. She shook her head. I owe the boys continuity. She paused. And I owe you an apology. I should have protected you more. Eli shook his head. You gave me room, she nodded. That was the best I could do. They stood there for a moment, surrounded by tools and quiet. Later that night, the bikes finally came back into the yard. Not 6, 3. The leader dismounted and looked at Eli carefully, like he was seeing him for the first time again. You held, the leader said. Eli nodded. Barely. They're backing off, the leader continued. Not because they're good, because they're exposed. Eli leaned against the bench. What about you? The leader shrugged. We fade. Eli frowned. That's it? That's always it, the leader said. We're not the story. Eli studied him. You paid me back. The leader's mouth twitched. You paid yourself. Eli shook his head. I didn't take your money. No, the leader said. You took responsibility. They stood in silence for a moment. I'm aging out, Eli said quietly. Soon. The leader nodded. I know. What happens then? Eli asked. The leader looked at the garage, the building, the fence. You go where you choose. Eli let that sit. The leader mounted his bike. Before pulling away, he spoke once more. Some people think refusing money is weakness, he said. They're wrong. He kicked the stand up. We'll be out of your shadow by morning. The bikes rolled out slow and controlled, not a statement this time, just departure. Eli watched until they were gone. He didn't feel relief. He felt weight, the kind that came after decisions when there was no one left to share them with. Behind him, the orphanage lights glowed steady. For the first time, they didn't feel temporary. But Eli knew something else too. The road that had come to him was leaving again, and whether he followed it or not would decide the last thing this story became. The quiet after exposure was heavier than the noise before it. Eli felt it settle over the orphanage like dust after demolition, everything still standing, but coated in the residue of what had just fallen apart. The cameras were gone by morning. The vans rolled out one by one, their attention already shifting to the next place that needed a face, a quote, a conflict simple enough to digest. St. Agnes was no longer useful as spectacle. That was both a relief and a danger. Mrs. Hanley signed the resignation 2 days later. No ceremony, no announcement, just a letter uploaded to the county portal and a quiet handshake in the hallway where boys pretended not to watch. She packed her office in a single cardboard box and left before lunch, walking past the garage without stopping. Eli didn't follow her. He stayed where he always stayed when something ended, hands busy, eyes forward, pretending continuity could be assembled from spare parts. The interim administrator returned that afternoon with a new posture, less authority, more caution. She spoke in phrases like stabilization period and temporary oversight committee. She didn't threaten, she documented. That was how you knew the fire had spread beyond the room they were in. Eli listened without comment. He wasn't the target anymore. That should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like abandonment. By the end of the week, the county announced funding reinstatement under provisional review. Transfers officially paused, an external audit scheduled. The language was careful enough to survive court if it needed to. The boys didn't understand any of it. They just knew they weren't being packed up yet. One of the younger ones, Tommy, 8 years old, too curious for his own safety, wandered into the garage while Eli was rebuilding a carburetor from memory. "Are they gone?" Tommy asked. Eli didn't look up. "Who?" "The bad people," Tommy said. Eli tightened a screw, then loosened it again, just enough to seat right. "Some of them," he said. Tommy frowned. "Are the bike guys bad?" Eli paused. "No," he said carefully. "They're not." Tommy nodded, satisfied. "They were loud." Eli almost smiled. That night, Eli slept longer than he had in weeks. When he woke, his phone was buzzing on the bench beside the cot. A message, no number, "You're not invisible anymore." Eli stared at it until the screen dimmed. He didn't reply. The next pressure didn't come from the county. It came from opportunity. 2 different programs reached out within 48 hours. Apprenticeships, scholarships, offers that had never existed before the story broke. People who'd never seen St. Agnes suddenly wanted to be associated with resilience, with turnaround, with the boy mechanic who stood up to a system. Mrs. Hanley would have called them miracles. Eli called them timing. The interim administrator asked to speak with him privately. They stood in the garage again, but this time she looked around with something like respect. "You're aging out soon," she said. "Yes," Eli replied. "You could leave," she continued. "Take one of these offers. Start clean." Eli nodded. "I could." "And?" she asked. "And this place still needs a generator," Eli said. "And someone who knows which outlets can't handle a surge." She watched him carefully. "You don't owe them that." Eli met her gaze. "I know. But you're staying anyway," she said. "Yes." She exhaled. "Then we need to define your role." Eli shook his head. "No, you don't." She frowned. "Everyone needs a role." "That's how they get owned," Eli replied. Silence stretched. Finally, she nodded once. "You're difficult," Eli shrugged. "It's a habit." She left him alone after that. The leader didn't return. Weeks passed, then a month. The bikes never came back through the gate. No engines idling nearby, no lights in the distance. The road returned to being just a road, not a boundary between worlds. Eli felt their absence more than he'd expected. Not as loss, as confirmation. One evening, while replacing a breaker panel with donated parts that arrived without a return address, Eli found the torque wrench again. Clean. Balanced. Still better than anything he'd ever owned. He held it for a long moment, then set it back in the drawer. Some tools were meant to be borrowed. Late that night, as summer heat pressed against the walls and the building creaked with restless sleep, Eli heard an engine outside. Not bikes. One car. He stepped out to the yard. A familiar figure leaned against the fence, helmetless, jacket unpatched. The leader looked older in the dim light, tired in a way that had nothing to do with riding. "Didn't think you'd come back," Eli said. "I didn't think I would," the leader replied. They stood in silence for a moment. "You stayed," the leader said. "Yes," Eli answered. "Most people don't," the leader said. Eli shrugged. "Most people didn't grow up here." The leader nodded. They're watching you now. I know, Eli said. You okay with that? The leader asked. Eli thought of the offers, the scrutiny, the way doors opened now that had never existed before. No, he said, but I can handle it. The leader studied him. You didn't take the money, you didn't join, you didn't leave. Eli met his gaze. I didn't break, the leader smiled faintly. That's rarer than loyalty. He stepped back from the fence. We won't be around after tonight. Eli nodded. I figured. Before turning away, the leader spoke again. You know why we paid you back the way we did? He asked. Eli didn't answer immediately. Because money closes a story, the leader continued. What we gave you keeps it open. Eli watched him disappear into the dark without another word. He went back into the garage and shut the door, not locking the world out, just choosing where he stood inside it. By morning, St. Agnes would still be standing, changed, watched, fragile in a different way. And Eli, grease under his nails, would still be there, older than his age, younger than his responsibility, holding a line no one had assigned him, not because someone paid him, because someone finally hadn't tried to. The last change didn't announce itself. No letter, no call, no headline. It came as a sound Eli hadn't heard in weeks, the generator cutting off because it wasn't needed anymore. He was under the hood of the old pickup when it happened, hands deep in heat and metal, adjusting a belt that had been whining since spring. The engine idled smooth. The lights stayed on. The silence that followed wasn't failure. It was redundancy. Eli straightened slowly and wiped his hands on a rag that had once been white. The yard looked the same. Fence still leaning, paint still peeling. But the air felt different, like a pressure system had passed and left something breathable behind. Inside, the boys were louder again, not reckless, just careless in the way kids were supposed to be. Someone laughed too hard. Someone ran when they didn't have to. Someone slammed a door without flinching afterward. Mrs. Hanley would have noticed that first. Eli noticed it now. The county hearing happened without him. That was deliberate. They didn't want his voice in the room anymore. They wanted exhibits, summaries, conclusions. Eli had done his part by refusing to disappear. The rest was cleanup. The interim administrator sent a short email that night. Oversight transition approved. Facility status, operational. No further action required from you at this time. No thank you, no apology. Eli deleted it. The offers stopped coming a week later. Not withdrawn, just quieted. The attention moved on. There was always a next story, another place that hadn't learned how to hold its ground yet. Eli stayed. He fixed the generator properly once the parts arrived, new wiring, grounded, signed off by an inspector who didn't linger. He rebuilt the tool chest from scrap steel donated anonymously and installed a lock that didn't break when you looked at it wrong. He taught 2 of the older boys how to change oil without stripping threads and made them redo it when they rushed. He didn't become staff. He didn't become management. He stayed what he was, necessary. One evening, as summer leaned toward fall, Eli stood at the fence and watched traffic pass. No bikes, no sedans, just headlights moving through the grid like blood through veins that didn't know his name. That was the point. A boy came up beside him, older than Tommy, quieter, the kind who watched before he spoke. You gonna leave? The boy asked. Eli didn't look at him. Someday. When? The boy pressed. Eli thought about the road, about torque wrenches and choices, about a leader who'd understood the weight of refusal better than most people understood money. When it makes sense, Eli said. The boy nodded like that was an answer. That night, Eli packed a small bag, not to go anywhere, just to see what it felt like. He folded clothes with care, put his phone charger in the side pocket, added the flash drive, even though he knew he'd probably never need it again. He hesitated over the torque wrench, then left it in the drawer. Some tools didn't belong to one person. He set the bag by the cot and lay down, staring at the ceiling, listening to the building breathe the way he always had. He slept. Before dawn, an engine passed on the road, just one. Eli woke without panic. He didn't get up to look. When morning came, the orphanage woke with it. Breakfast smells, shoes on tile, voices arguing about nothing important. Eli went back to the garage. He lifted the hood of the pickup again and finished the job he'd started, tightening the last bolt to spec, feeling the click settle into his hands. He closed the hood gently. For a moment, he He stood there with grease on his fingers and nothing pulling at him. No debt, no threat. No favor waiting to be called in. The world hadn't become fair. It had just, briefly, been forced to stop lying about itself. Eli washed his hands at the sink and watched the water run black, then clear. Outside, a boy waved at him through the window without knowing why. Eli waved back. Then he turned, picked up his rag, and went back to work. Not because anyone was watching, not because he was paid, not because someone had told him this was his role, but because the engine was running, because the light stayed on, because refusing the money had never been the point. Standing still had been.